Yeah. All right, everybody, it's 6 o'clock, so we'll go ahead and get started. Thanks for coming out. A couple things. I do have surveys at the back for the comprehensive plan, some hard copies, if anybody wants to fill those out, as well as the QR code. So they're on the table, on the door, so you can grab them on the way out. But again, thanks for coming. Thought it would be a good opportunity to kind of go over the ABCs of area planning and BZA, and Deb Lazier, who's with the APA of Indiana, agreed to give her presentation. So I'll leave it up to her.
Very good. Well, again, thanks everybody for coming out on this beautiful sunny spring day. Yeah, I'm sure we'd all be from other places, but appreciate you coming in. So my name is Deborah Luzier. I'm senior planner with GRW Engineering. Don't ask me any engineering questions. I don't know what they do, and don't ask them any planning questions. The engineers don't exactly know what I do. But for GRW, I actually write unified development ordinances, zoning ordinances, subdivision control ordinances, as well as amendments. I also serve as staff for some planning and building departments. Right now I've got 7 towns and 1 county that I act as the planning director for. I write comprehensive plans, and then I also do on-call services where if you're a little short-handed or you've got a technical project coming in and you need an outside review done, I jump in and do that as well. So some of the more recent planning experience I've had, town of Mooresville, Indiana, just west of Greenwood, Carroll County, which is where Delphi is, Jefferson County, which is way down south, Jasper County, Boone County, and Pendleton are some of my more recent clients. So now that you kind of know who I am, where are my plan commission members? Got a few. How about BCA members? Right, and county commissioners and other folks. You didn't raise your hand. What do you do? Who are the last ones that, or maybe planning commissioner, BCA members, or yes?
Highway Department.
Highway department. I saw your truck when you pulled in. Here.
I'm the attorney for the planning and zoning.
Okay, great. Where you're going to give me a rundown on 1625 and 425, right? The new legislation. How about back here?
I work for the radio station, and then I also am part of the GNAX Covia Solar Project.
All right, very good. Anybody else? Yes.
I'm legal counsel to GNAX.
Okay, very good. So as far as who determines the responsibilities of the planning commission, the BZA, and the legislative bodies, that is actually all spelled out in the state statutes for Indiana, the 3674 series. If you have problems sleeping, you can pull that up. It'll help you fall asleep right away. You start reading that and getting into some of the language. So one of the things statute does is it provides some oversight as to how each of these organizations are composed, what their purpose is, and things like that. So your planning commission is covered under the 200 series. It exists for the purpose of exercising planning and zoning powers and issuing building permits. Other purposes, planning for the highways, quality of life for your community, the needs of agriculture, industry, and business in your community, and planning for the efficient use of public funds. So, your Board of Zoning Appeals is covered under the 900 series, and it has jurisdiction over all land covered only by the zoning ordinance. It does not get into the subdivision ordinance, only the zoning ordinance. And they're established for the purpose of considering variances or any deviations from the standards of your zoning ordinance, considering special uses or conditional uses, special exceptions, however you term those in your ordinances, and also appeals of staff decisions. So if somebody has a grievance or doesn't agree with something that staff has decided on, you can appeal that to your Board of Zoning Appeals and they can make the final decision on that. I'm going to grab one of your handouts here. So keep looking back at the screen. So another thing that the state statute does is it goes over exactly who needs to serve on each of these boards. So since you are an area plan commission, meaning you oversee multiple jurisdictions, so you have your unincorporated areas, and then you also include, to my knowledge, Greensburg, is that correct? No. What other communities do you oversee?
Cedar Point, Millhouse, Westport, and St. Paul.
All right, so Greensburg has their own planning department? I was just kind of going off of your website and such and to pull that information together. So with regard to your membership, and please correct me if I didn't pull this straight. Under section 207, 210, and 28 helps determine what persons need to serve on your plan commission. And because you oversee multiple towns, then you would have 9 members on your plan commission. And you have 2 representatives, not from Greensburg, where are they? It's usually your largest town.
So,
Westport, okay. And then you have a municipal representative appointed by the Advisory Council on Town Affairs, which is going to be an organization of the remaining towns in that you oversee. The county commissioners has a representative appointed by the president of the county commissioners. County council gets a representative appointed by the county council. There's a representative appointed by the school corporation superintendents. You have the ag extension educator or one of their appointments, a citizen member appointed by the president of the commissioners, and a citizen member appointed by the county council. So it's a lot to keep track of. So it's very important to not only think about each of those slots or those membership chairs, but also keeping track of their terms, when those change over, if you've got somebody finishing out a term or jumping in at the end of the term. But it is supposed to be reflective of your full jurisdiction, meaning the unincorporated areas and your communities. So with regard to the citizen members that serve on your plan commission, they need to have some minimal qualifications. It's not like we're going to do a blood test or make them, recite the Pledge of Allegiance or anything. But we do need to have them reside in the unincorporated areas of the county or live anywhere in the county and own property in the unincorporated area of the county. And they also need to be knowledgeable of community, social, economic, agricultural, and industrial activities in the area. Now, one thing I want to point out is there is no age minimum for these persons to serve. So sometimes if you have a position open, you may reach out to maybe your high school and see if there's somebody who's interested in public administration or civics, get some of that in there. I also find that a lot of times it's a lot of middle-aged white men serving on the plan commission. I love middle-aged white men. I'm married to one of them, so, but we do like to see some diversity where we can if possible. So the organization of your plan commission is covered under the 300 series. And this talks about the people that need to be serving or working with your plan commission. So it addresses what is a quorum. That's going to be a majority of your full membership, not just a majority of those that showed up that night. That's a full majority. It's 9, so you need to have 5 folks at least attending to serve as that quorum. The statute also talks about official action. So 5 members need to vote in the same way in order for official action to take place at one of your meetings. It talks about leadership. So you need to have a president and a vice president of your area plan commission to oversee the meeting. You need to have a secretary or somebody that's going to take notes, keep track of attendance, things like that. And also do meeting minutes and minutes of the decisions and what types of actions we're taking at that meeting. And then lastly, the Area Plan Commission also oversees all employees of the Plan Commission. So whether that's your director, your secretary, any other staff that you have on board, is your building inspector under the Area Plan Commission or separate? Under the Area Plan Commission. So they would oversee those folks as well. So duties, these are the must-do things that your area plan commission must be doing. And this is covered under the 400 series. So first is to adopt rules and procedures for how you operate. It's going to talk about things like what constitutes official action. What do you do if there's perceived conflict of interest? What happens if we have a COVID shutdown and we need folks to participate remotely in some way? What happens if there's a tie vote? What's your next step? What order should the agendas be? These are all things that should be covered in your rules and procedures and kind of outlined to hopefully answer all those questions for things that don't come up very often. Another thing that the Plan Commission does is they approve the comprehensive plan. So when you have a new comprehensive plan for your community, it's actually the Plan Commission that holds the public hearing and approves it. But then it goes to each of the legislative bodies to pass a resolution to enact it and get it going in implementation. The Plan Commission considers development plans, which are how a site is going to be developed, usually for commercial, industrial, or multifamily projects. They consider primary plats for subdivisions. They also make recommendations on changing that zoning map. If a petitioner or a property owner wants to change the zoning of their property for some reason, it goes to the Plan Commission first for a recommendation. Also, they are in charge of making recommendations regarding changes to your zoning ordinance and subdivision control ordinance, or a unified development ordinance if you've consolidated those. And then also recommendations on planned unit developments. Does your county have planned unit developments, or do they have them enabled in the ordinances right now? No, okay. A lot of communities are dropping the idea of having planned unit developments. They are a little cumbersome to administer, especially long-term. But there are still some communities that feel it gives some a little bit of flexibility to your ordinance standards. Has anybody heard of a planned unit development before or know what they are? Sure. Essentially, a planned unit development is a zoning district where the developer gets to write his own zoning ordinance to go along with it. The problem with that is not all developers are ordinance writers. And after that PUD is adopted, then it goes to your Plan Commission staff to try to administer it, try to remember what all the developer was thinking at the time. So as you can imagine, that's how it gets to be pretty cumbersome to try and manage and administer in the future. So the Plan Commission also has some other powers that they don't have to do, but they may do. And this is also covered in the 400 series. The Plan Commission can establish an executive committee from its membership to act on its behalf. Sometimes that comes in handy with things like small plats or minor subdivisions. If those are kind of no-brainers or easy things to do, you can have your executive committee oversee that. You can also utilize them as maybe a review committee for some petitions that come through. Again, these would be the easy ones that don't always draw a huge crowd for your public hearings. The Plan Commission also drafts and recommends a fee schedule for your Plan Commission and BZA petitions, permits, and all their operations. Usually that's a separate ordinance. The Plan Commission decides, what those fees should be, and then it's adopted by the legislative body and put into action in each community. So we don't like to see those fees in your ordinances because it's cumbersome to amend a fee schedule that's in your ordinance. So we recommend that that be pulled out separately and considered and adopted that way. Another thing that the Plan Commission can do is appoint a hearing officer for the BZA petitions. You'd think this is something that the BZA would do, but since the Plan Commission is charged with oversight of your ordinances, they get to determine who that hearing officer is for BZA petitions. So let's say you have real easy setback variances that you keep getting quite a bit, maybe 10% off, 15% off or something. You can set up a hearing officer to consider each of those and make the final decision rather than setting up a whole BZA meeting for those purposes. You would still need to do the public notice things and report your findings and such as part of that decision, but you can do a hearing officer. A lot of larger communities do this, especially if they've got crazy long agendas and they're just trying to minimize. So here's some things that the Plan Commission cannot do. We talked about what they can do, but now we're going to talk about what they cannot do. So this is a big one that I get a lot. The Plan Commission cannot deny a subdivision or a development plan that meets the standards of your ordinance. So if somebody's proposing a new neighborhood development, they've met everything in your ordinance regarding lot size, the number of entrances, lot width, right of way, things like that. You can't just arbitrarily deny them because you don't like the home product they're bringing. As long as they meet your ordinance, you're obligated to approve it. The Plan Commission cannot determine whether a particular use or service is needed in the community. So if you have a commercial zoning district that allows, let's say, get another mattress store to come into town, you cannot deny them the opportunity to run their business provided they meet the ordinance and they do it according to the ordinance. So can't pick and choose on their uses if your zoning ordinance isn't picking and choosing those uses. Your Plan Commission cannot set sale price points, especially for homes. You have no control over that. That's something that the market does. If a developer wants to come in and say, hey, we're proposing homes in these price ranges, this is what we're targeting, that's great, but you can't hold them to that. You can't force them to set a certain price for homes. The Plan Commission does not oversee public utilities. The utilities themselves oversee themselves. So if development is going in and needs certain utilities run to it, that's up to the utility departments themselves to determine whether their standards are met or not. What your ordinance can do is say these types of developments do require sewer and water, for example. Get with the utility provider to make sure those are there. Another thing they cannot do is they cannot act in place of the administrator. So the administrator has certain roles and responsibilities. The Plan Commission cannot take those over. So for example, maybe signing off on a building permit, approving a development plan, a site plan or something like that. That all gets done by the administrator. He's enforcing the ordinances. It's not something one of the Plan Commission members can do on their own. The Plan Commission cannot apply unrelated conditions to its approvals. So sometimes I've seen this come up where, hey, Mr. Smith, we'll approve your subdivision that you're asking for tonight if you'll clean up that property you own on the other side of town. Or we want all the garage doors in this development to be hot pink because it's the new color for our community. Those aren't really things that have a rational relationship between each other and they're separate. So you have to make sure any conditions or commitments you're requiring of a developer or petitioner are relative to that specific petition. The Plan Commission cannot initiate a subdivision of property unless, of course, Plan Commission as a whole owns the property, but we know that's not the case. So the property owner or the majority of the property owners of the property are the ones that have to petition to have property subdivided. And lastly, the Plan Commission cannot only vacate the covenants for a subdivision. If somebody is wanting to have an old subdivision that never got developed vacated, keep in mind that vacating the property lines and vacating the covenants are two separate actions, and you can't just hit the covenants without hitting the plat as well. So any questions about what the Plan Commission can and can't do so far? Is there anything new that you're hearing tonight for the first time that you weren't aware
Is there a difference between an advisory Plan Commission and a governing?
of? There's multiple different types of Plan Commissions covered under state statute. The two top most common ones are advisory Plan Commissions and area Plan Commissions. Advisory Plan Commissions only have jurisdiction over one jurisdiction or one community. And that can be a county, it can be a city or a town as well. An area plan commission oversees multiple jurisdictions. So it could be the unincorporated areas of the county plus at least one community in their jurisdiction. The terms area and advisory are just terminology. It does not talk about what their role is. So when you hear the term advisory plan commission, it doesn't mean they're not making decisions and they're only advisory. They still make the same decisions as an area plan commission. So when you have your plan commission, you need to identify which part of state statute you're operating under, and you guys are operating under the area plan commission since you oversee multiple jurisdictions. If you lost all of your communities that you oversaw and you only had the unincorporated areas, then you would be an advisory plan commission. So every town and city is considered an advisory plan commission. Counties can be area or advisory. There's also metro planning, which covers, well, like Marion County and Indianapolis is a metro plan commission. We also have township joiners like near Zionsville that have multiple townships and the town that work together to oversee planning. It's a good question. We get that a lot. Any other questions about plan commissions? Okay, now we're going to get into the fun stuff, the Board of Zoning Appeals. So your Board of Zoning Appeals for the county is going to have 5 members. Almost all BZAs have 5 members unless you get into some of those metro or other types of plan commissions. But you have 1 APC citizen member who is appointed by the plan commission. So if we go back to the membership of your plan commission, you'll see you have certain citizen members. So of those citizen members, the plan commission as a whole has to select one of those to serve on the BZA. You have 1 city citizen member appointed by, and that would be not Greensburg, Westport. And that person cannot be an APC member. So this is where it gets a little bit squirrely as to what seat you hold. You also have 2 county citizen members appointed by the county commissioners. One has to be a plan commission member and one cannot. And then 1 town citizen member appointed by the town council. What's your next smallest or next largest town? Okay, so they would be appointing a member as well, and they cannot be an APC member. So one thing that you may notice about these folks is they're all citizen members. None of these people can be elected officials. They cannot be holding any other offices in the county or the towns. And the reason for this is because you're not supposed to be talking with BZA members about a petition. Elected officials need to be accessible to their constituents, so that creates an immediate conflict of interest. So that's why all these BZA members need to be citizen members and represent not only the plan commission, but the elected entities, and then also the community as a whole. So qualifications for those citizen members is they must reside in their respective jurisdiction, or they can live anywhere in the county and own property in the jurisdiction. But at least a majority of these members have to live in the plan commission's jurisdiction. State statute changed a few years ago to allow you to live outside but own property in the jurisdiction in order to hopefully widen that pool of potential members who can serve on your plan commission and BZA. Otherwise, like in some of my small communities, it's the same handful of folks showing up at every meeting and voting on everything. This at least expanded that a little bit. It also says that they need to be knowledgeable of community and social, economic, agricultural, and industrial activities in the area. And just like your plan commission, there's no age minimum for these folks who serve. So if you're ever short a member, kind of keep in mind that you could, tap into your high school or tap into any other services that may be willing to provide you with a membership. So organization of your BZA is covered on the 900 series. It talks about what a quorum is. So if you have 5 members, you need at least 3 folks to serve and act as a quorum. Those 3 members would have to all vote the same way in order to take official action on any type of petition or matter. Talks about the leadership. You would have a chairperson and a vice chairperson, and you would also have a secretary then to keep minutes and keep track of all of the decisions that were being made. And you also have to keep minutes of your meetings and everything that the BZA does during those hearings. The BZA, every time they meet, is always a public hearing. The only time they would meet in a meeting format is if there was like a training session or they were receiving information about something, but otherwise they always meet in specifically a public hearing. So the duties of your Board of Zoning Appeals are also spelled out in the 900 series, and just like the Plan Commission, they adopt rules and procedures. Your Board of Zoning Appeals considers special exceptions or conditional uses or special uses, however your ordinances term those. They also consider variances from any of the standards of your zoning ordinance. So if somebody can't meet a setback or they need a building that's higher than you allow in your district, they would go to the BZA for a variance from that standard. As we mentioned earlier, they consider any appeals from staff decisions. And then they can provide other guidance on matters. Sometimes I will bring, if there's a zoning violation, sometimes I'll bring it to my BZA for a discussion. I find a little bit of peer pressure and public humiliation goes a long way and is a heck of a lot cheaper than going to court. So I try to utilize them in that way. So with regard to the powers of the may do's, there are none. The BZA doesn't have optional things they can do. It's all spelled out in the must do's, and those are the only things that your BZA can do. So here's a list of things that the BZA cannot do. They cannot approve a petition that does not meet all of the criteria. So when your Area Plan Commission is considering a special exception or a variance, there are certain criteria that must be met before BZA can vote to approve something. So state statute spells out the variance criteria. I think there's 5. The state statute does not spell out your special exception or your conditional use criteria. They leave that up to your local ordinances to determine what those criteria are. So you can get a little creative, add as many as you want, but you should make them specific to help guide your decision making. So if somebody comes before the BZA for a variance or a special exception and they don't meet all of those criteria or they can't justify their requests, you shouldn't be approving those. Unfortunately, because you probably know a lot of people in your community and you know who has those petitions coming before you, or you're a friend of a friend who knows somebody, it can get a little bit personal. But just because you know they're a good person and everything doesn't mean you're obligated to approve those variances and special exceptions. In a perfect world, I would love to see the BZA consider petitions anonymously, where all you have to do is, well, here's the property, here's what they're proposing, and here's the conditions they're trying to meet. Do they meet them? And take out that personal relationship in them. So if you're a BZA member, try to keep that thought process in mind when you're looking at a petition, and not so much as to, do I know this person? Is somebody going to be mad at me if I vote the wrong way or something like that? Just like the Plan Commission, your BZA cannot decide whether a particular use or service is needed in the community. If the ordinance allows it, let's say by special exception or conditional use, you have to consider it on those merits, no matter how many duplicate services are in your community. Unless your ordinance says there's a limit, you're not allowed to decide if those uses should be allowed as well. As we just kind of touched on, the BZA cannot simply approve things because the applicant is a friend. You need to look at that long-term. If this property changes hands tomorrow, did we make the right decision by allowing this to occur? The BZA cannot grant a variance to a standard of the subdivision control ordinance. The BZA only looks at deviations from the zoning ordinance provisions that you have. Subdivision ordinance, they call those waivers, and they would go to the Plan Commission for those decisions. Just like the Plan Commission, the BZA cannot require unreasonable conditions or commitments. One thing that I do put usually in my rules and procedures for my communities or in the ordinance is if somebody has a zoning violation, we're not going to let them make any more petitions with the BZA or Plan Commission until that violation is remedied, unless their request is going to help remedy that situation. So I found there's a few serial violators that like to, well, I'm just going to apply for another petition and, you know, we're going to put a little stay of what's going on in the backyard here and distract you from your rules and responsibilities here. So that may be something you want to consider putting in your rules and procedures, that let's clean up one mess before we start a whole nother one. The BZA members cannot act in place of the administrator, same as what we talked about for your Plan Commission. The BZA can only do certain things and they have to stick to that. And lastly, the BZA cannot hear appeals from decisions made by the Plan Commission. They cannot hear any appeals made by any of the legislative bodies. So if you have a zone map change that got defeated when it got to the county commissioners, petitioner can't come back to the BZA and say, hey, we want you to fix this. Because the county commissioners have the final say on that rezone. It's appealed through the courts at that point. Okay, does anybody have any questions about the role of the BZA and what they can and can't do for taking action? Okay. Well, now we're going to get into the legislative bodies. So these are going to be your county commissioners, your city council, your town councils. These are folks that have been elected by the constituents in those jurisdictions. So with regard to land use planning, those legislative bodies would adopt the comprehensive plan, or they can direct the Plan Commission to start an amendment or write a comprehensive plan. The legislative body would be the entities that adopt the zoning ordinance and your subdivision ordinance, or they can tell the Plan Commission, hey, we want you to start some amendments or do some changes or think about these things. The legislative body adopts the zoning map, and they also consider and make the final decisions on amendments to the zoning maps. So they can also tell the Plan Commission, we want you to change the zoning of this area, even though they may not control the property, they can ask for property to be rezoned to another district. You do not need property owner's permission to do that. I do not recommend doing that. I would like to see everybody who owns the property be a participant and agree to it. But you may have some situations where you need to just take proactive approach, something that may be in coordination with your comprehensive plan, or maybe even it's something that state statute had recently changed and asked to happen. The legislative body is the one that would get that ball rolling for those changes. And lastly, adopting the subdivision control or subdivision standards for your community. And they can direct the Plan Commission to make those changes as well. So here's what the legislative bodies cannot do. They cannot do anything that the Plan Commission is charged with doing in state statute. So they cannot approve or deny subdivisions. They can accept infrastructure into the public, like public roads and things like that. But as far as approving the subdivisions, they do not have a role in doing that. They cannot approve or deny development plans for a community. They cannot issue building permits, and they cannot act in place of the administrator. So if you have folks going to a county commissioner or a town council person saying, yeah, we don't like, the decision that was made on this building permit. Can you go ahead and issue this building permit? You're the elected official. No, they cannot. Now that legislative person can come and talk to the planning director and say, hey, what's the deal? Why isn't this permit getting issued? There's probably a reason. But that elected official cannot act independently and do something that the administrator or your planning director is charged with doing. Also, they cannot tell the Plan Commission what to do, except to initiate an update to your comprehensive plan, or initiate a zone map change, or initiate changes to your ordinances themselves. So ultimately, the decisions on those three things are ratified by the legislative body in the end, but the Plan Commission has the role of holding those public hearings and getting that public input through the process. So some other things that the legislative body cannot do is they cannot do anything that the BCA does. So they cannot approve or deny variances from your zoning ordinance. They cannot approve or deny special exceptions, use variances, or special uses that are charged to the BZA for doing. You cannot approve or deny any appeals of staff decisions. Those are all things that state statute says this is what the BZA does. It does not default to the legislative body. However, unlike the Plan Commission, the county commissioners, the legislative bodies cannot tell BZA what to do. They can't tell them to vote this way on a petition, or we need this approved. Their role in the process was to adopt the ordinances for you to follow and enforce. So once they've done that, they are out of that responsibility, especially with regard to the BZA. So let's talk about things, or at least proactive things that your legislative body can do. So I like to ask my communities, if you don't like the development you're getting or the decisions your Plan Commission and BZA are making, then update your comprehensive plan. If your plan's more than 5 years old, it's a good time to start looking at it. Check back and see if you're even following your comprehensive plan. A lot of times we go through that year-long process, it gets thrown on a shelf, and the only thing we open it for is to check a future land use map. Well, there's more information in that comprehensive plan than just that land use map, and it's important to revisit it on a regular basis. You could ask yourself, have all the goals and objectives of your comprehensive plan been achieved? If so, it's time for an amendment. If not, then why not? What is not happening, with the various entities throughout the community as to why these goals have not been achieved? And maybe you've had some changes in development, or a large new employer that has come to the community. Are there new goals and objectives that need to be considered in your comprehensive plan? In Indiana, there's no requirement to update your comprehensive plan. There's no requirement to revisit it on a regular basis. But if your plan is, let's say, older than 10 years, it's probably time to at least revisit it and see, is there things you can check off the list that you've done? What changes need to be made? One of the communities that I worked for, they had hired me, and I went in and I was going through their comprehensive plan. This would have been in the late 1900s. Back in my 20s. And I was going through the comprehensive plan that had been done in the 70s, and there was a whole page missing. For the longest time, they thought there was only 5 goals and objectives of the comprehensive plan. Well, somehow I was able to go through all the boxes and find another original version that had that page, and there was another 3 goals and objectives that talked about affordable housing, multifamily housing, and making sure there's housing around existing municipal centers. And for some reason, somebody at the Area Plan Commission office had pulled that page out and didn't want anybody to know that affordable housing and multifamily housing and things like that should have been considered in the future development. So it was like the big mystery for the longest time. So another thing to consider is making sure that your zoning and subdivision ordinances and your zoning maps are up to date. So again, if you still don't like the development you're getting or the decisions your BZA and Plan Commission are making, let's look at those ordinances and see what condition those are in. Are your subdivisions self-sufficient? Meaning, are the roads in your residential subdivisions public? Is there enough open space or park space for the residents to enjoy, or are they placing that burden on the individual towns to provide? Do you have architectural standards in your ordinances, such as, do homes need to be a certain size or be comprised of certain materials in certain areas in order to reflect the other homes that are already in those areas? Are there more regulations and processes that staff can actually handle in your ordinance? This comes up quite a lot when I'm working on updating ordinances for folks. They see places like Carmel and Fishers and all the great things that are happening there. What they don't see is Carmel and Fishers probably has a staff of 20 to 25 in their planning department. And they may have one person that all their job is to count trees and make sure there's enough bushes and shrubs in everybody's front yard. It's usually not something in the smaller staff that, you know, you would want to get into the details on. Not saying you can't have those standards, but try to understand that those detailed standards take a lot of time to administer and enforce, and it can be very overwhelming. Are you seeing the same variance requests over and over and over again? And if they're being actually approved every time, then that's kind of a key that you need to update your ordinance and make it something that's legal that can happen without having to go to a public hearing and require public notices. Maybe there's some standards you can put in place that says, hey, you can have this setback variance granted automatically, provided you meet these criteria. That's absolutely something you can do in your ordinances. And lastly, can you incorporate any regulations to fix the headaches that you see on a daily basis? I'm not thinking of, one of them that comes to mind pretty quickly is up in Boone County where I work. They have a provision in their ordinance that says the ag district is very important and we want to preserve ag land for crops, raising animals and things like that. So for that reason, we want to minimize residential development in our ag districts. Well, when you get into families that want to split land off for their children and they want all these home lots along the road frontage, it gets to be a headache because after those folks, maybe they build the home and then, oh, there's a divorce. Now we got to sell the property. Somebody else is there. And that new person starts complaining about what the farmer's doing in the farmland right behind them. So that's one of the headaches that comes up a lot, especially in rural communities. So we try to put provisions in place to maybe encourage the clustering of those residential lots to take up as little space as possible. Maybe you required shared driveways or a minimum distance between new driveways in order to promote that clustering and preserve those large expanses of farmland. So just some things like that. I'm sure every community has their own little set of headaches that they're dealing with on a regular basis through the phone calls that they get. So those can usually be solved with some language in your ordinance. So next, there are some superpowers, or at least what I like to call superpowers, that I like to talk about that your Plan Commission and BZA can do or in their ordinances. So the Plan Commission can attach conditions to any recommendation on the zone map change, even if it's not a favorable recommendation. So I have a community right now who's acting on a rezoning. It's very controversial. And I let the Plan Commission know that the legislative body wants this development. But because you're the Plan Commission, you can attach conditions that even if you don't like the development, you can say, as best, this is the product we'd like to see happen, and pass that on to the legislative body so that they can make a decision with those commitments attached to it. So what my Plan Commission did was they gave it an unfavorable recommendation with a handful of conditions. And while the legislative body can send those back to the Plan Commission for some reconsideration, at least the Plan Commission has gotten the word out that these are things that the public has brought to our attention that we care about and are very important with regard to this development. And we want you to keep this in mind when you're acting on your final decision.
You're jumping.
Oh. All right, here we go. The BZA can attach conditions to any of their decisions. When I'm staff for Plan Commission and BZA, every staff report I give will have conditions, whether it's recommending approval or denial of, for example, a variance. So even if I don't support what the petitioner is requesting and I give it an unfavorable recommendation, I may say, but here are some things to consider if you choose to approve it that might make it more palatable. The legislative bodies cannot remove or diminish any of the recommendations without plan commission's reconsideration. So like we talked about, if the plan commission sends a zone map change to the county commissioners with commitments, and the county commissioners don't like those commitments, they can send them back to the planning commission for reconsideration. You've lost probably 1 to 2 months in the process. And the planning commission can say, yeah, you're kind of right. We don't need these 2 conditions, but this last one's very important. We still want it to go forward to the commissioners with this commitment. Ultimately, the commissioners can still say, yeah, we don't want that condition either, and overthrow the plan commission's recommendation. But still, at least the public has realized that the plan commission cares about these things, and maybe the legislative body doesn't. Since the legislative body is the elected officials, you want change to happen, you need to do it at the voting booth. So just something to keep in mind. The legislative bodies and the plan commission can initiate a zone map change with or without permission from the property owner. Talked about this a little earlier. If you're needing to be proactive for development, because that's what your comprehensive plan calls out. Maybe you got a new interchange on the interstate, so you expect development in that area because there's utilities. You can be proactive and go ahead and make those zone map changes so that it's ready for development. It's a great tool for economic development as well. Lastly, the legislative bodies can direct the plan commission to update the comprehensive plan, the ordinances, and the zoning maps. So even if both bodies aren't always seeing eye to eye, one or the other can initiate those changes. So now I'm going to talk a little bit about your ordinances. How old is your zoning and subdivision ordinances? Does anybody know, or when's the last update that came about?
2017.
All right, that's not too bad. So here's kind of a guide that a little bit of humor in there as well as to how to tell if it's time to update your ordinances. So if your ordinances are older than your oldest plan commission member, maybe time to give them another look and see where you can make changes. If your zoning and subdivision ordinances are still 2 different documents, it's time to probably look at making a change. I think about 10 or 12 years ago, there was nothing that said you couldn't combine your zoning and subdivision ordinances into a unified development ordinance, but now state statute has changed to reflect that. You can clearly do it. The nice thing about a UDO is that you can share a set of definitions. You can cross-reference different sections without worrying about conflict or misinformation or things like that. Sometimes confusion can happen if your ordinances aren't saying the same thing. If your legislative body is approving subdivisions, you need to get with the show and update your ordinances. There's only a couple of plan commissions left in the state that have the ability to approve subdivisions through the legislative body, and those are up in northwestern Indiana. I think Lake and St. Joe counties still have the ability for the legislative body to approve subdivisions. So those are the only folks that can still do that. Everybody else in the state has to let your plan commission approve subdivisions. If the text of the last amendment still has the name of the county you borrowed it from, it's time for an update. And this happens a lot more than you'd realize. If cell towers, solar installations, and accessory dwelling units aren't mentioned in your ordinances, it's time to look at an update. These, if you're not doing them at the local level, the state's going to try and do it for us. And as we know, they're already kind of marching that way anyway. So you can be proactive and take care of it yourself. If the staff copy of your ordinances has doubled in weight because of all the post-it notes, this is telling us that there's a problem with consistency, or maybe the ordinance isn't clear. So staff is making notes in the margins and on post-it notes to make sure, hey, the next time I do this again, I need to pay attention to this and do it the same way. That means you've got some language that's missing or some language that's unclear. If your industrial district is a secret hiding place for NIMBYs and LULUs. NIMBYs stand for not in my backyard, and LULUs are locally undesirable land uses. So if you're throwing all those into your industrial districts, I also find your industrial district is usually the only mixed use district in your community as well. It's where everybody throws the adult businesses and things like that into the industrial districts. I'm not sure if the industrial folks necessarily want all these land uses next to them either, but there are appropriate places for those uses and you can put standards in place to accommodate them. You don't have to hide them in the industrial districts. If you get a Christmas card from the asphalt industry because you're extensive parking standards. Back in the day, we used to design parking lots for the day after Thanksgiving and make sure there was plenty of space for everybody to park right up front to pick up their wife or husband while they're done shopping. That's no longer the case and we don't have to do that anymore. South Bend is one of the first communities in Indiana that no longer even has minimum parking standards. They let the developer determine what their parking is. And then they just regulate the ADA or the handicap spaces and making sure there's enough stacking. So I've been starting to write some ordinances that have very limited parking requirements. And I usually just say the developer and the administrator, planning director can discuss the best methodology to determine the parking that it's going to be supplied for a certain type of use. So obviously, that administrator can weigh in and say that's not enough or that's way too much, but those are things that are starting to happen. If your BZA is hearing variances every month and is always approving them, it's time to do some ordinance updates. As we talked about, maybe there's some standards you can put in place to make what used to require a variance allowed by right now, provided they meet those criteria. And then lastly, if you were using the PUD districts and that's your only mixed use district, it's time to look at your ordinances. Usually your downtown areas are mixed use. That mixed use means you may have residential and business uses in the same structure. It can also mean you have multifamily and single family occurring in the same development or the same zoning districts. Right, this has proven to be very exciting and motivating, and you want to learn more. There's a whole lot of resources out there on the web. The Indiana chapter of the American Planning Association, affectionately known as APAIN. If you look at that very carefully, it says a pain. So APAIN has a lot of resources for you. They do planning fundamentals webinars, which is kind of what I did today, but they're very drawn out into usually 4 to 8 hour classes. And we get into the real details of what you need to have in a comprehensive plan, what you need to have in your ordinances, rules and procedures, creative ways to solve problems and things like that. We do those in person and we also do them by webinars a few times a year. They're very affordable and would encourage you to check them out the next time they come around. APAIN also puts together what's called a Citizen Planner's Guide. And we have, I think we're up to about 13 or 14 different chapters that gets in the details of things like comprehensive plans, zoning and subdivision ordinances, development plans review, planning for public health, all of those things. You can read about them. They use state statute code citations. They talk about kind of the history of some of these things, how they came to be. I wrote the section on subdivisions. So again, very riveting. And again, if you have problems falling asleep, you can read the subdivision chapter. So I encourage you to reach out to indianaplanning.org and check out their website and see the resources. They also talk about different training opportunities, or just sometimes planners are getting together for dinner and talking about a certain subject, and you can go and sit in with them and discuss it with them. So that's all that I have this evening. I think you have my contact info in the back of the presentation there. If there's something you're dying to know about that you want to bring up during the training session here, feel free to shoot me an email or give me a call, and I'm definitely available to talk to you about it. We'll open up to any questions that you may have. I've answered every question everybody has, so.
Good job.
Or that everybody's really tired and just really wants to get out of here. And Doug made me. So, okay, well, very good. Well, again, thank you, everybody, for coming. We've shed some light on, some of the responsibilities of your plan commission, your BCA, and your legislative body, and hopefully clarified some of those forms for you.
All right, thank you. Well, thanks, Deb. Again, I've got our copies of the comprehensive plan survey at the door. Grab one if you want one, or you can, you are sure of it. And you live, you just want one. But that's all I have for tonight. Get home for the storms come.
You want one to do?
Thanks.